Why do people stop respecting you when you're always there for them? Why does your kindness invite betrayal and your time feel worthless to others? This video will show you the psychology behind why being constantly available is the death of your authority, and why withdrawing may be the most powerful move you can make. A king is not loved because he is close. He is revered because he is distant. A king who is too available begins to bleed power, not because he has become weaker in ability, but because he has made himself ordinary in perception. In the court of power, it is not enough to be strong. You must be seen as strong, and perception, unlike strength, is fragile. Carl Jung understood that the self is not only shaped by who we are, but by how we are seen in the eyes of others. When the sovereign reduces his presence, he magnifies his image. When he makes himself common, his image is consumed. There is a fatal illusion in believing that availability equals love, loyalty, or control. In fact, it often yields the opposite: disdain. Man is wired to devalue what is constant. The human psyche adapts quickly, too quickly. That which is always present is subconsciously reclassified as safe, familiar, and eventually disposable. This is not malice, it is instinct. Like a soldier who stops seeing the sword on his hip, the people stop seeing the king who is always in their midst. His words carry less weight, his time is no longer sacred, his presence, no longer an event, becomes a background noise. The very familiarity he offers to be loved begins to breed quiet contempt, and yet the trap is subtle. It is disguised as kindness, as duty, even as leadership, but it is a surrender. In the days of old, the ruler was a mystery. You saw his emblem more than his face, heard his decree more than his voice. This was no accident, it was design. Those who wield power understand that distance creates meaning. The moment you allow yourself to be everywhere, you become nowhere. You become like the servant, constantly in motion, responding to the needs and whims of others. You may call it generosity, but they will see it as submission. Carl Jung's exploration of archetypes points us to the deeper reason behind this. The king is not just a ruler, he is a symbol. He is the image of order, structure, and divine authority, and symbols must not be touched too often. Their value is in what they represent, not what they reveal. To overexpose the symbol is to ruin it. In a world ruled by images, to be seen too clearly is to be reduced. A wise sovereign must recognize that to be too accessible is to invite unconscious rebellion. When people feel they can reach you at will, they stop seeing you as higher. And once you lose elevation in their eyes, no amount of generosity can restore it. Your time, once valued like gold, is now given the worth of air. It is not just time you lose, it is leverage, mystique, and psychological superiority. Your enemies will sense it, your allies will forget it, and those beneath you will begin to wonder why they bowed in the first place. True power lies not in presence, but in controlled absence. Authority does not scream, it whispers, it waits, and it withholds. Availability, in excess, is not a virtue. It is a fracture in the armor of command. Respect does not arise from your nearness. It is not born out of familiarity, nor is it nurtured through constant exposure. In fact, the more people are allowed into your space, the more they begin to dismantle your image, piece by piece, with their eyes. A king who walks too often among his subjects becomes one of them, not in title, not in function, but in presence. And presence, to the human mind, is everything. People do not value what they see too often. They value what they fear to lose. Carl Jung recognized that what is missing in our lives speaks louder than what is present. That which is absent leaves a gap, and in that gap, the imagination flourishes. Absence feeds the mind with possibilities, while presence feeds it with limitations. The one who is too often available is bound by what he truly is, with all his human flaws exposed. But the one who holds back creates space for projection. The people will fill the silence with meaning. They will invent greatness. They will conjure mystery. That is the power of absence. It is an invitation to myth. Respect, once born in that space, becomes immune to logic. It cannot be challenged because it is not entirely real. It is psychological, and in the game of power, perception is more useful than truth. Look at any legendary ruler, spiritual figure, or even a successful leader in modern times. Their power was amplified not by how often they spoke, but by how sparingly they appeared. Every gesture was a spectacle. Every word a commandment. Their absence created a hunger, their silence an aura. The more they withdrew, the more people leaned in. The very act of not being available became a form of dominance. It forced others to wonder, to wait, to pursue. And in that dynamic, the distance became a hierarchy. The one who is sought after is always higher than the one who does the seeking. Jung's work on the archetypes reinforces this principle. The archetypal king is never just a man sitting on a throne. He is a symbol of divine order, spiritual authority, and untouchable command. If he becomes too familiar, he becomes contaminated with the common. The more accessible he becomes, the more his symbolic weight collapses. He is no longer the father of the nation. He becomes the man from next door, and men from next door do not rule empires. They are not feared, not revered, they are liked at best, but respect is never built on being liked. It is carved from distance, from control, from the ability to withhold. To be near is to be seen in full light, and full light is the enemy of awe. People must not see the king's face too often, for they will begin to notice the human details, his fatigue, his imperfection, his mood. These cracks break the spell, and once the spell is broken, no amount of proximity can restore it. In contrast, absence protects the illusion. It allows the king to remain above. It reinforces the sense that his time is scarce, and therefore sacred. When he does choose to appear, the very air changes. The moment becomes theater. The court holds its breath. Words gain weight not because they are louder, but because they are rare. Proximity may bring affection, but affection is not respect. The king is not here to be loved in the way a friend is loved. His purpose is to be honored, and honor grows not in comfort, but in distance. Let others flood the room with their presence. Let them make themselves available. The king must learn to disappear, to speak only when silence has matured into tension. When he does, he will find that his words echo louder, his name carries farther, and his absence becomes a throne no rival can occupy. Power does not lie in abundance, but in scarcity. The more a thing is withheld, the more valuable it becomes. A king who offers too much of himself, his time, his presence, his opinions becomes cheap in the eyes of those he rules. But a king who withholds, who restrains his impulses to speak, to appear, to please, he gains gravity. Carl Jung understood this deeply through his concept of individuation, the journey of becoming a whole and unified self. But that journey, Jung noted, is not one of merging with others. It is a journey of separation from the collective, from the expectations of the crowd, from the comfort of being constantly understood. The king, in Jungian terms, must pull back into himself. He must become whole by withdrawing from the need to be seen. To withhold is not to retreat from life. It is to create tension, and tension is the root of influence. In every court, The ruler who says little is listened to the most. The advisor who speaks sparingly is feared for his silence. Why? Because silence suggests depth. The one who holds back creates a vacuum, and that vacuum is filled by the imagination of others. They wonder what he thinks. They speculate what he will do. And in that wondering, they grant him power beyond what words could ever provide. Presence can only show what is. Withholding makes others imagine what could be, and imagination always paints in bolder colors than reality. Jung's view of the unconscious mind supports this principle. What is repressed does not disappear. It becomes stronger in the shadows. Likewise, when a leader represses his need to be constantly known and instead restrains himself, he creates a presence in absence. His mystique grows not from what he says, but from what he refuses to reveal. The king who withholds becomes the king who is studied. His mystery becomes doctrine. His unpredictability becomes law. In the game of influence, restraint is a signal of control. The undisciplined man rushes to prove himself, to explain, to justify. But the one who masters his power never spills it. He chooses moments carefully. He allows others to thirst for his attention, his approval, his appearance. And by making his presence rare, he elevates it to something sacred. Jung taught that the true self is not scattered into every situation. It is integrated, focused, and decisive. A fragmented man shares himself with everyone. A king chooses who is worthy. Every gesture that is held back becomes 10 times more potent when finally released. Every word that is delayed carries more authority when finally spoken. When a ruler makes people wait, he does not lose them. He owns their attention. Their anticipation becomes loyalty. Their hunger becomes submission. Even in the personal realm, this law holds. The man who is always available to the desires of others soon loses his identity, but the man who withholds reclaims his throne, not just in the world, but within himself. To withhold is also to build inner strength. The one who constantly speaks weakens his thoughts through overexposure. The one who constantly acts burns out his will in unmeasured movements. But the one who delays his reaction, who pauses before giving, who does not surrender to impulse, that is the man who stands like a fortress. His control radiates outward, his detachment becomes influence. Others begin to chase what he withholds. And in that chase, they kneel without knowing why. In the economy of attention, presence is a currency, and scarcity raises its value. When the king withdraws, the people remember him. When he becomes unavailable, they begin to want him. This is not just a principle of power. It is a fundamental law of human psychology. Carl Jung spoke of the archetype, those deep psychological patterns that shape human behavior beneath the surface of culture and personality. The king, as an archetype, is not powerful simply because he rules. He is powerful because he exists slightly beyond reach. He becomes a gravitational force, not by being everywhere, but by being somewhere else. Withdrawal, in this sense, is not weakness. It is strategy. It is the method by which the king ensures that he remains a figure of desire, not of obligation. When you remove yourself from the center of others' attention, you don't disappear. You become imagined. And what is imagined becomes amplified. The moment a powerful figure stops appearing, his presence begins to loom larger in absence. The people ask questions, they whisper, they assign meaning to the silence, and in their uncertainty, they attach value. The king, who once stood before them as a man, now exists in their minds as a symbol. This transition from man to symbol is only possible through retreat. Constant exposure prevents it. Familiarity blocks transformation. but withdrawal initiates the metamorphosis of the ruler into legend. In Jungian terms, this speaks directly to the power of the unconscious projection. What is missing from reality, the unconscious mind will try to complete. If the king does not speak, the people will imagine what he might say. If he does not act, they will predict what he will do. This is how the myth of power is sustained, not through constant demonstration, but through selective engagement. Power that is always shown becomes predictable, but power that is withheld creates mystique, and mystique generates demand. When you withdraw from others, you force them into reflection. They must now consider what your absence means. They may become anxious, they may become obsessed, but either way, they are now reacting to your silence. This reaction is where demand is born. The king no longer needs to pursue loyalty. It begins to pursue him. The world adjusts to the vacuum he has left behind, and in trying to fill it, the people reorient themselves around his lack. What is missing becomes the axis of their attention. Even in everyday human relationships, this principle is at play. The one who makes himself scarce becomes attractive. The one who is always available fades into the background. Human psychology does not respond to overexposure with love. It responds with numbness. Desire is sustained through limitation. And so the king, by withdrawing, becomes the subject of desire. His reappearance becomes an event. His word, an intervention. Jung taught that transformation begins in isolation. So too, the transformation of perception begins when the king steps back from the crowd. What once seemed ordinary now feels irreplaceable. What was once taken for granted is now watched for. By refusing to be constantly present, the ruler becomes eternally awaited. A king who does not pull away becomes a servant to the moment. But a king who withdraws becomes a figure rooted in memory and anticipation. This is the psychology of distance. This is the art of turning your absence into presence, your silence into echo, your delay into desire. The wise ruler does not chase reverence. He creates a void that compels it. Rarity is not a condition, it is a weapon. The king who makes himself rare becomes immune to casual judgment, daily complaints, and the erosion of status that comes with overexposure. The human mind is wired to overanalyze what it sees too often and to revere what it sees rarely. When something becomes scarce, it becomes sacred. And in the theater of power, sanctity is not earned through morality. It is constructed through design. A ruler's strength is not only in his armies, his laws, or his wisdom. It is in his aura, and this aura cannot survive if he is always seen, always heard, always explaining himself to those below. Carl Jung taught that the deeper layers of the psyche are influenced not by logic, but by symbols. To preserve your symbolic value, you must become an enigma. And enigma is only born from distance and rarity. A king is not protected merely by gods. He is protected by mystery. He is insulated by the unknown. The less you are understood, the more people fear your limits. The more you are exposed, the more they test you. The moment your presence becomes routine, your identity becomes negotiable. People begin to speak of you not with awe, but with familiarity. And familiarity is the slow rot of authority. The sovereign must never allow his essence to be reduced to a name uttered in casual tone. His image must remain elevated, ungraspable, above the reach of daily talk. Rarity preserves this elevation. It keeps the throne above the ground. Jung's theory of the self also reveals something important here. The self is not the ego that performs every day. It is the totality of who we are, much of it unseen, buried in the unconscious, quietly influencing how others perceive us. A king aligned with his self does not throw himself into every interaction. He understands that holding back parts of himself increases their psychological weight. When the sovereign becomes rare, he activates projection. Others begin to see what they need to see in him. They project strength, wisdom, discipline, even if he remains silent. He becomes a mirror, a screen upon which their desires and fears are reflected. And as long as he remains scarce, he remains larger than life. In a world addicted to visibility, the one who withholds becomes the most watched. The one who does not explain becomes the most interpreted. The one who does not appear becomes the most remembered. Kings throughout history who lasted were those who mastered this aura of rarity. Their presence became mythic not through volume, but through timing. They appeared only when the moment was ripe, when silence had matured into yearning. Each appearance then became an act of power because it was unexpected, unpromised, unscheduled. It was not demanded, it was granted, and that difference rewrites the entire structure of power. To protect the throne is not just to defend it with force. It is to defend it with absence. It is to protect the king's image from being tainted by the dust of the common world. This is why wise rulers build layers around themselves, not only walls, but rituals, distance, and unpredictability. They are not always available because they are not meant to be. Their time is not just their own. It is part of their myth. Their movements must be rare, like eclipses. Their words must be events, not chatter. Their presence must cause the room to pause. And only by becoming rare does this level of reverence become possible. A king does not command respect by making himself easy to reach. He commands it by becoming hard to access. In a world that mistakes availability for value, the true sovereign understands the ancient law. What is rare becomes sacred, and what is always present becomes forgotten. When you withdraw, when you become scarce, when you no longer offer yourself on demand, the world does not move on. It leans in. Carl Jung revealed that the deeper parts of human psychology respond not to what is seen plainly, but to what is sensed, withheld, imagined. Power, like the unconscious, operates in shadow. When you stop being available, you stop being ordinary. You shift from a person into a symbol, and symbols do not beg for attention, they command it. They dominate not with noise, but with silence, not with pursuit, but with stillness. The psychology of the king is not about domination. It is about elevation. Elevation through withdrawal, mystique through absence, influence through restraint. Let the others clamor for approval, fill every room, offer every opinion. You will not. You will master the art of disappearance, because the moment you stop being available, everything begins to change.